Yes. This is for Miss Rosalyn. We'll put you over here. I am, yes. Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Please take your seats. I want to welcome you this morning to the Jimmy Carter National Historic Site and our President's Day program, and we have a really exciting program for you here today. Can't hear? All right. How about that? Better? All right. So we have an exciting program for you here today, and I want to mention several of the groups who are joining us this morning here in Plains High School Auditorium. And of course, first of all, I want to introduce our very special guests this morning, former President Jimmy Carter and First Lady Rosalynn Carter. So this is the National Park Service Centennial Year, and during this year we have a special emphasis on education. And I want to acquaint all of our visitors today with the scholars that we have joining us today. And first I want to mention that we're joined by two classes from Georgia Southwestern University, the Department of History and Political Science, and their professor, Dr. Berggren. And then maybe if that group wants to just stand up so that people can see you, that would be great. Again, Georgia Southwestern University. And we are also joined by two classes from Columbia State University, again, the Department of History and Political Science, with Professors Gary Sprayberry and Fred Gordon. And would you all please just let us know where you are? Thank you very much. We're so glad to see you here this morning. We're joined this morning by State Representative Mike Chokas, and I wonder, Mike, if you would just let us recognize you this morning, stand up, and thank you. Thank you so much. All right, we are joined by two classrooms this morning through our distance learning program. So if you look at the screens to my left, you'll be able to see those classes periodically during the presentation. First, Royal Valley Middle School joining us from Topeka, Kansas. These are 8th grade students. They're brought there to this event by their teacher, Mr. Nate McAllister. And this class is gathered at the National Park Service site Brown versus the Board of Education, but they're coming in to participate in this program, and we'll learn more about them later on during the event. We're also joined by high school students from Boise High School, and these are students in the class of Ms. Monica Church. So we have AP Government and AP Comparative Government classes, as well as student council representatives. And I wonder if Ms. Church can hear me and speak to me. We may be joined by a special guest in that classroom, and that would be former Governor of Idaho, Cecil Andrus. And certainly we want to extend a warm welcome to all of our visitors here at Plains High School. So we have a special partnership with the not-for-profit technology and education innovators called Internet2. That's how we're able to have these distant locations joining us today. And I wanted to thank that program, and in particular their director, James Worley, for assisting us in putting this program together. And with those introductions, I would say that President Carter and Mrs. Carter, this year marks the 40th anniversary of your successful 1976 presidential campaign. And we have asked that you share your recollections of that campaign, and of course, any other thoughts that you wish to share with us today. So let me turn the show over to you. And we are really looking forward to hearing from you.
Good morning, everybody. How many of you knew that there were elections 40 years ago? Well, I've been restudying what we did back in those times. As you may or may not know, I had been elected governor of Georgia in 1970, and when I was in office for about 2 years as governor, I decided to explore the possibility of running for president. And most of the betting at that time was on George Wallace from Alabama running. He was a segregationist and had become very famous and was very successful in the previous election back in 1972, and the other candidate that everybody thought would run would be Ted Kennedy, a very liberal senator from Massachusetts. So my plan originally was to run between the segregationist George Wallace and the liberal Ted Kennedy. And so later, Ted Kennedy had some problems, as you may know, at Chappaquiddick in Massachusetts, that he decided not to run. And then when he decided not to run, about 8 or 9 other senators and a couple of governors decided to run also. So in 1972, we had a nomination in a convention in Miami, Florida, and George McGovern was chosen, a very wonderful man, but very liberal for the taste of the South. And I think all of us governors wanted to be George McGovern's vice presidential candidate, but he didn't choose any of us. And so later in 1972, after the convention was over and George McGovern was very badly beaten all over the country, I just decided to start exploring the possibility of my running. So we had about 5 or 6 people that were kind of helping us plan, including Rosalynn, of course, and a few others. Dr. Peter Bourne, who had been my drug czar in Georgia and was later drug czar for the whole United States, wrote a letter to me about 7 pages long outlining how I might be elected president. We never did say the word president. We were too embarrassed to say that. We just said run for national office. And you know there's only one nationwide office, I was president. So we decided that we would run for the national office. And I still hadn't made up my mind about whether or not to run. And then the most distinguished Georgian at that time was Dean Rusk, who had been Secretary of State under 2 presidents, and he was a distinguished professor over at the University of Georgia. And I got a phone call from him one afternoon and said he wanted to come and meet with me about a matter of importance. And I said, well, I'm in my office at the governor's mansion until about 5 o'clock every day. Why don't you come there? He said, no, I can't meet with you at the governor's office because this is an unofficial thing, and the governor's office is an official place. So he and I had I'd say a southern libation on the back porch of the governor's mansion. And the first thing Dean Rusk said was, I think you ought to run for president this year. He was the first outsider that ever mentioned that. And he was a very intimate friend of the Kennedy family. And so it had a double meaning for me. As soon as Dean Rusk got through talking, I didn't tell him that I was going to run, but I told Rosalynn that we just got approval from Dean Rusk, and I thought it was time for us to decide to go. So we did. So we decided to run for president. And we had intensive meetings to decide what news media were important in every state, what particular reporters we needed to contact. We studied the rules of the Democratic Party about how to get elected. And there were about 31 states that had primaries, and the other one had caucuses. And most of the other candidates didn't pay any attention to me because I was from the Deep South. And there hadn't been a candidate of any substance from the Deep South since about 1848, I think. So I started campaigning the day I went out of office as governor, and all during 1975, Jody Powell, my press secretary from Vienna, Georgia, and I campaigned around the country. And we didn't have any success in getting recognition. I remember once we went to Massachusetts and went out to one of the historic sites of the Revolutionary War, and one TV camera came out there, and they said, why in the world are you wasting your time running for president? There's no way that a Southerner is going to be getting any votes in Massachusetts. And I said, well, when John Kennedy ran for Massachusetts as president just a few years ago, he got more votes in Georgia than he did in Massachusetts, and I think it's time for the Massachusetts people to pay me some respect. So that was the problem that we had. I remember we also went to Iowa, which was the first caucus then like it is now, and New Hampshire was the second one. And in Iowa, we had a hard time finding any reporters that would pay any attention to us. We would look for somebody with a scratch pad. We thought it might be a reporter. Sometimes it was just a college student going to class, but we thought it was a reporter, so we tried to get to talk to him. And one night, Jody Powell and I always slept in the same room when we couldn't get somebody to let us stay in their own house. We tried to get a free room every night because we didn't let, none of our supporters, the people that were helping us around on our staff, were permitted to spend $1 on a hotel room. They either got somebody in the community to let them spend the night in their home, or either they had to sleep in their own car. So Jody and I were sleeping in a hotel room that night, and just a double bed, and Jody was a terrible snorer. He snored horribly. So Jody didn't want to have a drink at night before he went to bed, and so I went up to bed and tried to get to sleep before Jody got there so I could sleep a while. So Jody came in and woke me up for the first time. He said, "Governor, I got some good news for you." I said, "What, Jody?" I was kind of asleep. He said, "We're going to be on television tomorrow." I said, "I can't believe we're going to be on television. What is it?" He said, he kept fumbling around. Finally he said, "I'll tell you in the morning." So we got up. He said, "We have to get up early, though." So we got up about 5 o'clock, got in the car and started going down toward the television station. And I said, "What kind of program is it?" He said, "Well, it's a very interesting program. A lot of people watch it." I said, "What kind of program is it?" He said, "Do you have any favorite recipes?" And what it was a cooking show. And so I thought up my favorite recipe at that time, which is how to cook rough fish. In case you want to know, you fillet the fish and you slice it in pieces about like a French fry and soak it overnight in a real good sauce, and then the next morning you dip it in flour and cook it. So that's a really good recipe if you want to remember it. But the people didn't recognize me on the TV show at all. But later on, when I won Iowa, they showed it about every week, 3 or 4 times every week, so it became one of the most famous TV shows in Iowa. Well, we had a good time campaigning around the country, and we weren't making much progress, but Rosen, about that time, joined me. In fact, we had 7 campaigns going on every day. I went in one direction, Rosen went in a different direction, my oldest son and his wife went in another direction, my middle son and his wife did the same, my youngest son and his wife, my mother and her youngest sister. So we had 7 Carter campaigns going on all the time, while the other candidates were mostly wasting their time in the U.S. Senate. And so I visited 120 communities in Iowa, and eventually, of course, which was our plan, I came in first in Iowa. And then the next one was a primary in New Hampshire, and nobody thought I had a chance again, and I came in first in New Hampshire. The biggest contest for me, though, was in Florida, where George Wallace had swept Florida the year before that, the campaign before that, and he was expected to do the same thing this time. And Scoop Jackson, a senator from Washington, was a darling of the Jewish community, so everybody figured that Scoop Jackson would carry the Jewish community and the liberal people in Florida, and George Wallace would carry the conservatives, which wouldn't leave me much. But I had support from Andy Young and the King family and others, so when we got to Florida, we campaigned down there a lot too, and I carried Florida. We never were surprised. I always was confident that I would win. I was the only one who thought so, except maybe Rosen. I'll let her say speak for herself. But anyway, we came through Florida, and then the other candidates, there were still 9 of them, very distinguished people, and they formed an organization called ABC, Anybody But Carter. And what they would do was every election after that, like in Pennsylvania, or Maryland, and so forth, they would pick out their candidate that they thought would do best against me in that state, and all the other candidates would drop out. But they would go in and help the candidate running against me. So they tried to single shot me in all of those states. I remember Scoop Jackson ran in Pennsylvania, and Hubert Humphrey, who was a previous candidate, ran. He supported Scoop Jackson. And Jerry Brown, who's still the governor of California, ran against me in Maryland. He was called Governor Moonbeam. he had a lot of support from students and so forth, and they thought he'd do well in Maryland. I carried both those states, by the way. So we followed through to the end, and I kept on getting delegates. One of the things that we decided at the very beginning was to run in every state, because sometimes our state has a law that if you win the most votes, you get all the delegates. Other states have proportional delegate assignments, where if you get 20% of the votes, you get 20% of the delegates. But we decided to run in every state, and all the other candidates tried to do something different. They wanted to go to the convention and have it deadlocked and then broker for the nomination. I didn't want to do that, so I ran all out in every state. Jody and I visited all 50 states. I don't think I ever campaigned with Roosevelt except one day, and that was in Louisiana and in New Orleans, and so we never hardly saw each other till the end of the campaign. But every weekend we would come home and we would share ideas about what was the most important thing for the voters and what we need to do. We had to be sure, of course, that we were all preaching the same language, because we had 7 of us all professing to speak for me, and we had to make darn sure that we didn't say one thing in a conservative state like Iowa and then say something different in a very liberal state like Massachusetts. So that's what we did. And we finally got enough delegates to win on the first ballot. And I became the nominee of the party. And then I ran against a wonderful man named Jerry Ford, who replaced Richard Nixon when he resigned under threat of impeachment. And Jerry Ford and I never had a negative television commercial. We respected each other very much. And you know how much money we raised for our campaign against each other? Anybody want to guess? 0. We didn't raise any money. At that time, every taxpayer could mark on his tax return if he wanted to. I'll give $1 for the general election for President of the United States. So that's all we used. We didn't have to go to any special interest groups to get money, which is profoundly important now.
Still on there, isn't it?
Well, now they contribute $3. Each taxpayer can give $3 if you want to. But no candidate has used that money since 2004, because with the stupid Supreme Court ruling, Citizens United, there's almost an unlimited amount of money that pours into campaigns from rich people, and it's basically legal bribery in our country. So the richest people can give a lot of money to a candidate, and of course they expect something in return when they get through. So it's totally changed now, and a lot of that money nowadays is spent, as you know, for negative commercials. So the Republicans hate the Democrats, and they still do when they get to Washington. Our country's divided and people are polarized. There are blue states and red states. We didn't have any of that then. When I got in the White House, we were very pleased. By the way, the first reception we had in the White House, 750 people came who had let one of our members of our family spend the night with them. So those were special friends of ours. They took us in when nobody else would, and when we couldn't afford a hotel room. So that was a special night for us. So that's the way I see the campaign, as quickly as I can describe it. And now let Rosa correct my mistakes, and she can tell you how she did. Okay.
Well, actually, he didn't say anything that I disapproved of.
Oh, wow.
And actually, he didn't give any of my remarks hardly either. So, and I had a friend who called me just before this campaign. Well, it was after the campaign started, because it was when you were seeing people in Iowa all the time and learning about the candidates and so forth. And she said, "You played such an important role in the campaign when Jimmy was running. Why don't you write down, as you watch the television news, why don't you just write down some of the things you remember?" Which I did. And I was so glad you asked me to speak about this, because I had my speech already written. So, and I'm going to read it to you, and I'll try not to be boring. Well, watching the media coverage of the campaign for president, and especially the caucuses in Iowa, brought back a lot of memories for me. To begin with, I loved campaigning. I loved campaigning. I got to meet the most wonderful people. I learned more about my country than I would ever have known. And I went in 47 states during that campaign, all but South Dakota, North Dakota, and Alaska. So I learned a lot, you can see, about the country. And before the campaign started, the 76 campaign, I had campaigned for Jimmy for governor for a year. And I had a friend named Edna Langford who went with me in Georgia. And so I called Edna and said, do you want to go to Florida with me? We had to carry Florida. It was not the first one, but it was really important. It was one of the first. It must have been one of the first. So I went to Florida. We went to Florida, and we were going to stay for 2 weeks, which we did, and to see if I campaigned in another state. I didn't know what to expect. I didn't know what kind of questions people were going to ask me, what they thought I ought to know, and I was really, really nervous. But we set out, and then I was going to stay for 2 weeks. We knew several people who lived there, so we made arrangements to stay in the houses with them. And as Jimmy said, it was because we didn't have any money, and we had to find somebody to stay with. And that became easy because there were always people that supported you. When you got to a town, you could make some friends, and they would have you spend the night in their house. We began our journey stopping in every community, getting all the press we could by knocking on the doors of the radio stations and newspaper offices, and the reaction was always the same. I'm Mrs. Jimmy Carter. My husband's running for president. President of what? President of the United States. You got to be kidding. No, I'm not kidding, and I thought you might want to interview me. And they all did, which was a big surprise. To put this in perspective, people were not used to seeing family members in presidential campaigns. I think I was the first wife of a president to campaign like that. And to my surprise, everybody was excited to see me. It was fun. And I was getting over my nervousness. And I shouldn't have been worried about questions after the initial surprise of seeing me. The questions at that time, and later in the campaign there were issues, but at that time they were about where are you from and who is Jimmy Carter? What has he ever done? But we stopped in every town we came to, passing out brochures in every place of business, going through every courthouse we came to, meeting all the officials. And Ed and I had a Florida almanac of Democratic Party officials, and we looked them up every time we came to a town that had one. And I remember finding one in his garden, and so we walked up and down the rows admiring his vegetables, and we came away with his valuable list of names he had saved over several decades of statewide party workers and contributors. That was a real coup, we thought. And the whole campaign used that in Florida. This would happen often out of the blue, that people would ask me, would tell me they didn't know what to ask me. Even journalists in some places, it was such a surprise to them. But before the first day was over, I had a list of 5 or 6 questions, but let me go back a little bit. You can see my page is right. We were riding along and saw a rural radio station antenna in a field. So we drove out to that radio station. And there was one employee there, a young man playing records. And so I gave him I'm Mrs. Jimmy Carter, my husband's running for president. And he was shocked. I said, could you interview me? He said, I'm here playing records, that's all I do. I wouldn't have any idea what to ask you. And so I said, I'll give you a question. I can tell you. And he finally said, okay, so I did that. Well, before the first day was over, I had 5 or 6, as I said before. And they made the points I wanted to know about Jimmy, that I wanted them to know about Jimmy. And so the rest of that whole trip to Florida for 2 weeks, when I got ready when I was going to do an interview, I would always ask people, tell people, I have these questions you might want to ask me. And 9 times out of 10, they did. And so over and over and over, every day, I was really getting my message out. And we unexpectedly found other ways to get our message out. One day, Edna and I stopped at lunch at a motel, and we saw a car in the parking lot with a press sticker on it. So we went in and said, is something happening here today? And they said, yes, this is the weekly Rotary Club meeting. So we walked down the hall, peeped in the door. Somebody saw us and motioned us in. So we were going in, and Edna said, my husband is a Rotarian. And I said, my husband is running for president. And before they could do anything, Edna introduced me, and I made a speech to the Rotary Club. Then another day we were riding along, and we came to this huge crowd of people, and cars everywhere, pickup trucks, big trucks. We stopped and learned that we had come upon the weekly cattle sale, and this was great luck. I mean, it was great luck because we already knew from the courthouse crowd that the man, Buddy Neal, who ran the sale was the president of the Cattlemen's Association of Florida and a very significant political figure. And so they stopped the cow, and I made my speech, and then they started the auction right over again. That was fun. Soon it was like campaigning in Georgia, and Edna and I felt very much at home with the people we were meeting. Up early in the morning, working until the evening, and staying in people's homes. As Jimmy said, we did that because we didn't have any money, but it turned out to be a really good thing, because if you spent the night with somebody, they'd get really excited about your campaign, become good campaign workers. We had all of this going on while, as Jimmy said, the senators were wasting their time in Congress. By the time we drove home, we had left a trail of newspaper headlines with Jimmy's name prominently displayed. After a few days, when we saw our pictures, though we would have our pictures most of the time on the front page, but with little writing underneath saying that I was Mrs. Jimmy Carter. So we learned that if we held up a bumper sticker with big Carter letters on it, that we would have, then we saw our photographs, and everybody could see that it was Jimmy Carter, that we were trying to get the name across. We learned the value of radio interviews, and this was fun too when people would come up to us and say, I heard you on the radio and I was hoping I'd get to see you. It was really getting to be exciting. And we came away with a list of things to do in our next campaign trips. One was stop at courthouses. You meet all the officials, but they can tell you who the good Democrats are in the communities too. You get to know, that's why I got to know Buddy Neal, who was the president of the Cattlemen's Association. Insist on front page of the newspaper. If that's not possible, then the news. Don't let the newspaper reporter, receptionist, send you to the society editor or to the woman's page writer. That was really important. Look for large radio antennas. We went to every radio antenna we saw. Sometimes, I remember one time we were going to an antenna and we ran up on Edna and I was sleeping in the back seat. We had a driver that had been assigned to us in Florida. And we were running up kind of a hill and stopped. And we woke up and there was a railroad track and a fence on the other side, and there was an antenna way off in the distance. But most of the time, we found people, the same thing I found in that first one, rural stations, people playing music, and they would always interview me. And that was fun. And sometimes we found fire stations. Fire stations have radio antennas. And that was a good place to be because they vote too, and they cook the best breakfasts. I have eaten so many breakfasts in fire stations with streakoline, fried bacon, and it was good. Stay in people's homes, it works. Muster up courage and intrude. We found out when I went to the auction and the Rotary Club, people like it. Nobody minded because by then we thought we were something special, being the wife and friend of a presidential candidate. That was something special back then. When I got home, I couldn't wait to tell Jimmy, we can do it. If I hadn't been looking at a map, I would have thought we were in Georgia, because people are the same. And do you know, I found that out everywhere we went in the whole country. People are the same. They want to be able to make ends meet. They want good things for their children, good schools, good church community. Well, that was the pattern of my campaigning over the country. And Iowa was my next stop. And I had the best time in Iowa. At first I would go to a coffee, and there might be 6 people there. That to me was a pretty good number. Later they got bigger and bigger. But I had been working in our farm supply business for years before Jimmy ran for governor. And I would go into these coffees with farmers and farmers' houses, and I could talk to them about the price of corn, about what kind of fertilizer they used on their corn. It was so much fun. Their eyes would get bigger and bigger, and then they'd start looking at each other. And I was thinking about that the other day, watching those candidates in Iowa. I had a built-in inroad to those people that they would never have thought of. But I was in 105 communities in Iowa. You said you're in 120. I didn't know you were in more than I was.
Did it work hard?
Well, it's funny, I don't remember the bad things. Well, I didn't see the bad publicity because I was working. And most people were really nice to me. Sometimes you'd meet somebody who says, I'm not for you, lady. I'm not for your husband. But that was not really often. People were very nice everywhere I went. I would get really tired. I remember being at press conference. I was sitting on a box and reporters were on the floor and standing up. And you get the same questions over and over and over, and you get so tired of answering. It becomes rote. So I was supposed to be answering a question, and all of a sudden I stopped. I had no idea what I was saying. And I said, did I answer your question? And this man said, you did just fine, Ms. Carter. I don't know what I told him. Well, that's about the only thing, that's what I wrote down about my memories about the campaign. But one thing that Jimmy didn't mention was, and I did see some of these people in New Hampshire, was the Peanut Brigade. Because people from Georgia came.
I'll do it.
You do it? Good. Okay.
I don't want to interrupt you, go ahead.
I'm through. That was all.
Well, I thought Rosa might mention this, and she didn't have it in her talk. I didn't see her notes. But one of the reasons that I won was that we had what was known as the Peanut Brigade. And a group from Sumter County decided they would go and help me by just going to a foreign state and in the snow, wherever it was, and telling people, we know Jimmy Carter, we're his neighbor, and we hope you'll vote for him. And they would hand out pamphlets and so forth. And that grew and grew and grew under the direction of Dot Paget, who's just written a book about this and some other things. So we had a very great advantage over the other candidates. In the key states like Iowa, of course, was one. New Hampshire was especially important because that was all during the time when snow was 2 or 3 feet on the ground, and the Jimmy Carter workers would go around with bundled up so you couldn't hardly see who it was, and knock on doors and say, I've come to promote my candidate, Jimmy Carter, and then they would go to Wisconsin or wherever the other state was. It was important. One of the most important problems that I had to face was the African-American problem, because people looked on me as a Southerner, and because I was a Southerner, I was undoubtedly a segregationist, which I wasn't. And so Andy Young was one of my key supporters. And I remember one time, I wasn't there, but I've heard Andy talk about it, there was a meeting of journalists and all the campaign managers in Washington, D.C. And the reporter, one of the reporters asked, how about you guys telling me how many African Americans you have on your staff? And some of them would say, well, we're still looking for some qualified ones. We haven't got one yet. Others would say, well, we've got one or we've got two. And finally they got down to Andy Young, and Andy said, I don't know how many we have on our staff. But at the beginning of last month, we had 22. So that was, we were just completely in harmony with the African American community. And later, when I ran for president against Ted Kennedy in 1980, I got 85% of the African American vote then. So we had a good start coming from the South. So those are the kind of things that we remember. And you see, Rosen had a lot better time than I did campaigning. But now, if you have any questions, we'll be glad to try to answer them.
It's another thing that I learned. I could do things I never dreamed I would do. For instance, I performed reading Aaron Copland's A Portrait of Lincoln on the stage with a symphony orchestra in Baltimore. It's a reading. If you think I would ever have done that, I can't believe I did it. You did things. And another thing that's interesting is that I got to Dallas, Texas, I think, and was going to the country fair to have a picture made with my peanut butter pound cake. Well, I never had a peanut butter pound cake, but it was a good chance for me to get some publicity. So I went there, and that's what people will do. They'll say, they'll make a recipe, say the recipe's mine, say they're my cousin, different things like that. Anyway, I got there and they gave me a knife. It was a pound cake with no frosting on it, with peanuts in the hull, stuck in the middle and running out. It was awful. This was a dirty trick. And then I tried to cut it. I could not cut the cake. I tried and tried, made a fool of myself. But anyway, sometimes you do things, sometimes you have to do things you didn't want to do.
How are you going to handle the question?
All right. Well, first, we want to thank President and Mrs. Carter for sharing their personal thoughts and experiences. Thank you very much. So we have a question and answer program that is going to come to us through our video distance learning session. And we're going to start with, by introducing Linda Rosenblum, who is the National Park Service Education and Teacher Corps Program Manager. And Linda will moderate that program for us. And Linda, if you're ready, please go ahead and begin.
Good morning, and thank you for allowing us to participate in this program today. We have one class of students here with me at the Brown County Board of Education National Historic Site, and these are 8th grade students from the Royal Valley Middle School in Marietta, Kansas. And we also have a group of students participating at the Idaho Department of Education from Boise High School. So at this time, we're going to go ahead and start with our first question from Chance Chance Lyman from Royal Valley Middle School. Go ahead and ask your question.
Hello, Mr. President and Mrs. Carter. I understand that you traveled over 50,000 miles to visit 37 states and delivered 200 speeches during the primaries. My question, Mr. President and First Lady, is this: out of the 200 speeches, which one was the most memorable or important to you?
Well, I didn't mention all of the excuse me, I didn't mention all the debates ahead of time. We didn't have any debates among the Democratic candidates. But later, when I got the nomination, Gerald Ford and I, the incumbent president, and I had 3 different debates. And I would say that those debates were the most memorable to me. We never did have any direct confrontation among the Democratic candidates. But I think one of the things that turned the election away from the incumbent president, Gerald Ford, to me, was one night Gerald Ford was asked about the occupation of Eastern Europe countries by the Soviet Union. This was after the Second World War. And he said there is no occupation by the Soviet Union of Eastern European countries. And he insisted on that answer. And so it was really the best thing that happened to me in the debates was Gerald Ford giving an incorrect answer. I think he didn't want to take the blame for letting the Soviet Union occupy those countries. So that's why he denied it, I guess. But he made a serious mistake there. But we had 3 debates against each other, and those were the most important. Most of my speeches then were to college students, maybe 15 or 20 at the most, and to programs on television sometimes when I would be interviewed by Walter Cronkite or somebody like that when I got to be famous. So I didn't have any real outstanding speech to make during the campaign. I might say the number one issue that I raised was when I was campaigning in Iowa, and we had been through a time of terrible turmoil in this country. John Kennedy had been assassinated. His brother Robert Kennedy had been assassinated. Martin Luther King Jr. had been assassinated. We had been in a very unpleasant, unpopular war in Vietnam. Our public officials, the Secretary of Defense, and even the President had told lies about how we were making out in Vietnam. And so the people were eager for somebody to tell the truth. And quite often I would have from college students a question, if you're president, will you always tell the truth? And so I adopted that as one of my main speech points. And I would tell them, I'll always tell you the truth from this day until the end of my terms in office. And if I ever make a misleading statement, don't vote for me. And so that became my main point to be made to the public in speeches was, I will never lie to you. And that was a very important aspect of my campaign. Good question.
I don't know about, okay. I thought, go ahead.
Please go ahead, Linda.
Okay, thank you, Mr. President. Our next question will be from Liberty High School, and Aaron Rasmussen, you want to unmute your microphone and ask a question?
Okay. In what ways has your campaign changed from when you ran and today?
Well, the game has changed from notice. I don't think anything that Roger and I have described this morning that you've seen on television in the last few months. There's a matter of deep dissatisfaction with government. There's an incompatibility completely between Democrats and Republicans. Every candidate that hopes to get the nomination for president has to raise hundreds of millions of dollars. And so the country is polarized. When I got into the White House, I got just as much support from Republicans as I did from Democrats. And so I had a very high batting average as president in getting my programs approved by the people in the Congress. And that was a House and Senate. So that's completely changed. And I think that it would be hard for a young person to even understand what would be happening in the campaign 40 years ago. You wouldn't recognize it at all. The candidates were polite to each other. They never condemned each other. We never tried to tear down the reputation of another candidate.
You tried to tear down their issues.
We just debated the issues. That's right, Rosen said. I didn't try to tear down the issues, but I did.
Differ with them.
I tried to show where I would be better than they. I was lucky enough to have served in the military service. I was in the submarines. I was a nuclear engineer, so I had a good education. I had been on the county school board in Sumter County before I went to be governor, and I had been the governor of a great state. I had traveled a lot overseas, so I had a lot of things on my behalf, and I was a farmer. And the statement that got the most applause was, I am not a lawyer. So when I said that, everybody would applaud. So those are the kind of issues that came up between us, but that was just comparing my past record as a governor and as in my other life with theirs, either in office or not. So we never did try to destroy the reputation of another person. If we had, I think if I had done that to another candidate, I would have been despised by the American public. They would not have approved any candidate trying to destroy the reputation of another candidate. So that was the main reasons that were different, I would think.
Our next question is from Royal Valley Middle School again, and our student's name is Kane Singh.
Good morning, Mr. President. This question is for the President and Mrs. Carter. What was the hardest challenge you had to overcome during the campaign?
Well, the hardest challenge I had to overcome was that there was a general feeling throughout the country that anybody that had been the governor of a deep South state was very conservative on the race issue. And we had had segregation in our country for 100 years after the war between the states or the Civil War. That was over in 1865, and it was in the 1860s that Lyndon Johnson finally got the Voting Rights Act passed. And I think when that happened, there was kind of a sigh of relief by the American people. They didn't want to see the race issue re-injected into the campaign. And so that was the main thing I had to overcome. I had to show the people that I was not a racist and that I had reached out throughout my early career as governor and so forth to the people of all types. In fact, when I made my governor's inaugural speech in 1971 in January, my main speech was that I've traveled this state as much as anybody ever has, and I tell you quite frankly that the time for racial discrimination is over, and never again should a black child be deprived of an equal right to education, to health care, and to the qualities of life. So I had a good record in the past, but that was the record that was listed in Georgia, and it didn't exist in other states in the country. That was the biggest handicap I had to overcome. Maybe Roseman had a different one.
My greatest challenge was to get the press to take me seriously. I remember the first Meet the Press I was on, I was excited about being there, being able to talk about the issues and about Jimmy. And I got questions like, wouldn't you rather be traveling around Europe than doing this? Do you ever do any cooking? It was really hard. The people and the local people wanted to know all about me and Jimmy and why he was running, why he was running and those kinds of things. But it was really hard for me to get the press. They finally realized that I knew what was going on, so it didn't take them very long.
Thank you. Our next question will go to Boise and will be coming from Mojan Fair.
Okay, so how can we combat big money in politics today?
I didn't understand the question.
How can we combat big money in politics today?
That's an almost impossible thing to do in this country because all of the incumbent members of Congress, as well as the governors and presidents, now owe their position in office to large contributions, and they don't want to give it up. And so an incumbent member of Congress, who will have to change the law if it ever is changed, will have to give up that opportunity to have a higher priority for a rich person to give a contribution to him or her than it is to give a contribution to some unknown person to run against the incumbent. I don't think the Supreme Court is going to change the Citizens United ruling, which said that a corporation is the same as a person, until the Supreme Court is changed. And it's going to be very difficult to get a majority on the Supreme Court that would correct that terrible mistake they have made. So I don't see any real possibility of getting rid of money. The Carter Center now monitors elections all over the world, and one of the basic things we demand is that every candidate who qualifies to run for office has to have equal rights to television and radio. And so that would not make America even qualified for the Carter Senator Monitoring election here. We also demand, by the way, that there be one central election commission that would pass the rules and regulations for our elections. And we have about 444 of them, I think. Every county has its own election procedures. And so that's another reason why America has now one of the poorest democratic systems, I think, of all the developed nations in the world. And it's primarily because of money pouring in. I think I saw Cecil Andrews sitting there. Did I see Cecil Andrews sitting there?
Yes, sir, I believe you do.
I see so.
I say so.
Mrs. Carter, Cecil, great to see you again, my friend, and I'm just tickled to death that you have overcome that challenge that you had with the cancer, and that we can still benefit from your knowledge. Thank you for being here and helping these kids.
Thank you, Cecil. Cecil. Cecil Andrews was the governor of Idaho when I was governor, and I asked him to be my Secretary of Interior in charge of all the national park system, and it was Cecil Andrews that was really responsible for the Alaska Lands Bill, which doubled the total size of our national parks and tripled the size of all of our wilderness areas in history. So because of Cecil Andrews, our national park system is now twice as large as it was before he and I went into the White House area.
Our next question will be from Royal Valley Middle School, and our question comes from Hannah Schnecker.
Hello, Mr. President and Ms. Carter. This question is for Ms. Carter. How is your relationship with your husband affected by the presidential campaign?
That's interesting. Well, I think it actually drew us closer together because we had one goal, and we worked toward that one goal, and we always felt like we could do it. And I felt good because I felt like I was helping. I felt like he couldn't have won without me. And it's kind of bonded us.
I think it bonded us also. When we moved into the White House, two of our sons and Amy moved into the White House with us. So we had a very good family affair there. Amy was just 9 years old. And so it was a wonderful occasion for us to govern the country, I think, using the wisdom and advice and so forth of each other. So I think it really brought our family closer together. And we're still pretty close together.
And we were so separated for so long campaigning. I was campaigning for 18 months. That's when I went to Florida. There was still 18 months until the election. And because Jimmy was gone all the time and all the children were gone. And so we came together. We came home together. And what was so much fun was that even when our children would go out, when we would go out or when the children would go out, everybody wanted to see them and shake hands with them and take pictures of them. So everybody just liked to come home and be together. It was really a family affair.
So the campaign may be one reason we will be married 70 years next July.
That's right.
Do we have one more question from Boise High School?
We gonna get any from here?
We can do that. Would you like to?
Whatever you want.
Okay.
We have one more question from Royal Valley, if Boise doesn't have any more.
Okay.
Okay, our last question from Boise, from Royal Valley comes from Jason Wamigo.
Hello, Mr. President and Ms. Carter. What was the impact of
Well, I was governor of Georgia when the Watergate scandal took place, but I think that's another thing that I should have mentioned a while ago about how the country was so dissatisfied with lies and cheating and I think that Gerald Ford did a good job in replacing President Nixon, but there was some doubt, which I never raised in the campaign, that he traded the pardon of Nixon, which was complete, for his anointment as vice president. I don't think that's true, but that was some of the allegations that were made against him, not by me, but by others. So I would say, in balance, probably the Watergate scandal helped me be elected. That's a good question, too.
Linda, thank you so much for moderating those questions. I think that we do have time for 2 or 3 questions from this audience, and I wonder if any of our scholars from Columbia State University, Columbus State University, or GSW would like to offer a question. Yes, oh, yes, sir, please. Yes.
Hello, Mr. and Mrs.
Hi.
Carter. My name is Chandler Harris.
Come closer, if you don't mind. I want to be able to hear you. Okay, thank you. Yeah, I think everybody else in here would like to hear you, too.
Hello, Mr. and Mrs. Carter. My name is Chandler Harris, and this question is for both of you. What advice did you give Jason Carter when he was running for office?
I gave him a good bit of advice. The main thing I want to tell you about, this audience about, is always tell the truth. I think that's one of the main things that people want in a candidate is to know that when they say something, it's not a lie. So quite often, as you know, some of our presidents, some of our U.S. senators, some of our others have lied about things and gotten caught with it. So I think it's not just a matter of getting caught, but just to tell the truth. It takes a lot of political courage. And so that was the main thing I told Jason. It was to always tell the truth.
You get the same questions over and over, and if you start answering them differently, then you don't remember which one you've said to somebody. But let's see, what advice? I asked him if I could campaign for him, and I did.
We all did.
And we all campaigned for him, and I realized how much I had missed campaigning, because you go to coffees and teas, you meet people. It's just, to me, I just love it. So I had a good time.
Thank you, Mr. President Carter. And Ms. Carter, do you believe that the diplomatic relations with the rest of the world has improved or worsened since your time in office?
I think it's worsened. You know, I think we ought to have diplomatic relations with every country in the world that's possible. And so, but we have a different opinion sometimes in the White House. We don't want to break down barriers between us, and so we don't have any way to communicate with those countries. For instance, when I left office, my successor in office, Ronald Reagan, decided that we would withdraw our ambassador from Syria. I think we should have kept our ambassadors in Syria all the way through that time. When the Iranians took our hostages, I immediately renewed diplomatic relations with the Iranians. In fact, it was my diplomats that went over to the revolutionary government that were taken in captivity. And so we have a lot of countries in the world now with whom we don't have diplomatic relations. By the way, some other nations like France, they try to have relations with other countries even though they have a serious disagreement between the governments, between the presidents. And I think that's always better, because if you do have a problem or a difference or an argument, you can resolve it if you have a good ambassador there and vice versa. So I think it's better always to have a good diplomatic relationship. One of the main things that I did that is probably the most important thing that I did when I was president was to establish diplomatic relations with the People's Republic of China. we had not had diplomatic relations with China for 35 years when I became president. And so we decided to do that, and I think it was one of the best things that I did. So yes, we ought to communicate with other people even when we have differences of opinion.
And I think Jim has answered the question sufficiently. I think diplomatic relations are really important. When Jimmy was president, we were making friends with countries all over the world. And it's more important to be friendly than not to be friendly. And diplomatic relations can help you be friendly.
Let's go for one more question, and the gentleman here with his hand up.
Thank you, Mr. President. First Lady. My question is, do you feel that you received an unfair amount of criticism for the botched hostage rescue mission? And what do you think it says about the state of our country that oftentimes people focus on that mission instead of the treaties that you were able to successfully have signed?
Well, I don't think I got too much bad press coverage because of the botched rescue mission. I did the best I could. We knew that we had failed in getting our hostages released. About 3 o'clock in the morning, I went back to the White House and slept a few hours, and then got up at 6 o'clock in the morning. I went on all the TV stations that existed then and told the people what I had done, what I tried to do, and how disappointed I was. And I took full blame for the mistake. So I think in that particular issue, I think I was treated fairly well. But that was the main reason that I think that we were not reelected, was because I was not able to get the hostages released before Election Day. November the 4th was Election Day, and that was exactly 1 year after the hostages were taken. It was the anniversary of the hostage being taken. So that was a major issue. But I was treated fairly.
So I
may not have thought so at the time, but I do now.
I didn't think so then or now.
So once again, President and Mrs. Carter, we thank you so much for making this a memorable event. And do you have any last thoughts for us before we end this portion of our presentation?
I would encourage all the young people to run for office. We need good people in office. And I think you would learn a lot, and you would learn about people, and you would learn issues that you'd never had thought about before. And if you can't run for office, campaign for somebody that you like and get to know issues and things that are important to the people around you.
And I would say don't ever give up on our country. We have a great country. Eventually the people's will prevail. And even though we might be discouraged or alienated or aggravated at some of the things that go on during the campaign, I believe that in the future our people will make the right decision. And we'll see that the next president will try to do a good job. So let's don't give up on our country. Let's just participate as much as we can. And I agree with Rosen's advice. If you don't run for office yourself, get involved in politics. It's not a bad situation. And although you might enjoy it just as much as I did, or you might really enjoy it like Rosen did. But it's a lot of fun in the long run, and it's very gratifying. Politics is not a bad thing to do, I don't think.
Well, thank you very much. We certainly appreciate having you with us today.